Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. So, at the moment, I've kind of got a little bit of limited bandwidth. There's many things I'm doing at the moment, so I'm not able to kind of put out as many podcasts as I normally would do. There was an interview we had planned today. I think we had a couple of mishaps, but we're going to rearrange. So I'm doing one of my more standardized podcasts today, and I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's been kind of occupying my thoughts recently about how kind of political history on both sides of the Atlantic, Britain and America, sometimes models each other. Sometimes there are similarities, sometimes echoes, sometimes it rhymes. Zohran Mamdani and the recent slate of um, left Democrat primary candidates for the New York State Senate. Um, this is fascinating stuff, and it's fascinating because it's something I think we saw in Britain in the Corbyn moment, 2015 to 2020, except done far more competently. Okay. Um, and where the similarities are most acute is the reaction of the Democrat Party now and the Labour Party in the UK then, that closely models itself on the American Democrats. Sometimes the Republicans, I would venture, but anyway. There used to be this thing in American political discourse that used to kind of annoy me about the use of the word liberal. And I sort of backtrack from this a little bit now, but it used to be this. So you would listen to some fiery character like Bill O'Reilly or Glenn Beck or something like that, um, shouting at people on Fox News saying liberals this, liberals that. And I often thought, well, no, you're talking about the left. And you're talking in this kind of merged term. Um, and liberalism very rarely sits on the left. Much of what socialism and collectivist ideas in general argue is actually quite an anathema to liberalism. And then looking at it now, you think, well, when they are aiming their wrath at the Democrat Party and referring to them as liberals, well, in one sense, they are. I mean, obviously, the sense that people like Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck and the people that came after them, the sense that they meant was that, and then and you have to kind of go deep into alt-right conspiracy theories here to interpret what it is they're trying to say. But they thought, that that these quote unquote liberals were engaging in some kind of great replacement theory. White Americans are being who would vote Republican are being replaced by immigrants from the third world who are natural Democrat fodder, and all this sort of actually openly fascist kind of conspiracy theorizing. But when you refer to the likes of Nancy Pelosi or Hillary Clinton as liberals, well, yeah, you hit the nail dead on the head. They are. They believe in two kinds of liberalism. Firstly, they believe in a degree of individual liberty. Actually, not so much Hillary Clinton because she was, part of the three strikes and you're out sort of era. But they believe in a certain degree of individual liberty, normally the kind that can be exercised by the wealthy, a kind of a certain lifestyle libertarianism, where you can be whatever whatever it is you wish to be, so that it perfectly encapsulates things like gay rights and feminism, but it ignores the social aspect of both of those movements. If you are embracing feminism for wealthy white women, you're not really doing feminism per se. You know, if you haven't got much to say about the poorest women in the world and how they're treated and exploited, you're not saying very much. I know there was this whole period where they were very keen on Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen banking movement, microcredit movement, as some sort of means of empowering women in Bangladesh and other parts of the global south to become entrepreneurs. There's this kind of obsession that somehow that is the kind of the universal panacea of all ills, you know, become an entrepreneur. Well, um, and as Thomas Frank in his book Listen Liberal pointed out, that the kind of the stupidity of all of this is that you are notionally empowering the, some of the poorest women in the world, but you're starting off by indebting them. Even if it's at very low interest rates, it's still debt. And he, I mean, opinions differ on the Grameen movement, but he argued it doesn't work at all. Anyway, so there was that. But what they really are keen on, and these are, they're much like the kind of the British Labour Party post-Thatcher. What they're really keen on is the functioning of markets and the empowerment of private wealth and the ability of private wealth to do as it wishes. They are very keen on Wall Street wealth. They're very keen on Silicon Valley wealth. And absolutely, as night follows day, once Trump's time is up, and the Democrats see that they have a future, or they have some electoral possibilities, electoral chances, they will form very cozy alliances with Jeff Bezos, with Mark Zuckerberg, and possibly even Elon Musk. But he has actually gone so far beyond the pale that maybe he's kind of a bit too unacceptable. Anyway, so the Democrat Party, which is for some reason painted as being, you know, the left of American discourse, is the Democrat Party has for at least 40 years embraced many of the same kind of economic tenets that the Republicans have too. And this is why Trump was so distressing to the body politic, because here you have this guy that really doesn't have much of a workable theory of anything at all. He believes in this kind of sort of nativism that you sort of pick up in the bar, which is ironic because he doesn't drink. But this kind of poorly thought through nativism around, you know, tariffs and American exceptionalism, that if you think about it for 2 minutes, would be destined to wind up in, well, the mess that exists now. But he didn't believe in the kind of order of global rules and systems and institutions that had kept America quite nicely as the hegemonic global power since the end of the Second World War, even when the facts on the ground are changing. Here's a little thought experiment, you know, if Trump hadn't won in 2024, and if we were now into the era of another Democrat president, Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris had resisted the urge to attack Iran, would much of America's weakness have been exposed? Arguably not. Perhaps a Democrat president might have done a little bit to temper Netanyahu. It would have certainly helped him, as Biden did, hugely. But would you have had a more effective systemic manager? I would think probably you would. And the problem for Trump now is that he has done a number of things. So it's not even his problem, it's going to be somebody else's. The number of things that he's done that undermine the functioning of the old system to the point of collapse means that someone like President Newsom or President Cortez if they were to come to power in the next presidential election, are going to have really crumbs to work with. How they repair the order that once existed, I don't know. I don't even know if that's possible. So then, do they try to create a Democrat version of what Trump has created? Or do they go in a completely different and perhaps more left direction? I suspect inaction, dodging the question, and paralysis probably more likely to prevail. Anyway, back to Mamdani. So, to explain my thoughts on Mamdani, I think you have to kind of take a deep dive into what happened to Corbyn. And I think Mamdani is so far, perhaps he's read the tea leaves and understood the fate of Corbyn, and to some extent the fate of Bernie Sanders is one that he can avoid. But what happened to Corbyn between 2015 and 2020 is an instructional story, and anybody on the American left who hasn't heard this one, it's really important to focus on here on this, because this is precisely not what the Republicans will do to Mamdani, but what the Democrats will do to him, and they're the bigger danger. Neither the Labour Party in Great Britain or the Democrat Party in America are or ever have been socialist parties. Now, their detractors would say that that's absolutely incorrect, but neither have ever proposed. Roosevelt came close to it maybe during the Second New Deal, but neither have proposed any meaningful democratization of the economy. Socialism, you can hang as many hats on it as you like, and depending on who you ask, what it is different. But you can broadly describe it as the democratization of wealth and power in society. Are you looking at state control of utilities like railways and gas and water and things like that? Or are we really talking about the democratization of the workplace itself, where the creation of the goods of society through an industrialized process are managed by the workers, where the people who, the population at large, their access to housing, to utilities, to an income, to basic amenities, transport, healthcare, education, are there as a result of democratic right. You're born with a right to these things. The Labour Party in the post-Second World War era, 1945 to 51, did democratise some of these things. But we've been in a steady rollback ever since, and some Labour administrations have participated in that, not just Blair. I mean, Callaghan and Healey, arguably. Anyway, the period from 2015 to 2020 was the product of Tory austerity. The Conservatives, who came to power in 2010, decided that the world financial crisis gave them an opportunity to do some of the things even Margaret Thatcher didn't view as being politically possible. And they did them as well because ripping up the welfare state, shrinking the size of the state permanently, not only gave opportunities for rentier capitalism to extract lots and lots of wealth, but it neatly avoided the threat of those who'd been bailed out after the banks and financial institutions and those that benefited hugely from these bailouts, all this lovely free money, having to give any of it back. A different political project might have argued that it was they who had been saved by the public purse, and it was time now to repay a significant proportion of that through windfall taxes and things like that. So that was never going to happen. Austerity is eagerly supported by the Labour Party. Ed Balls, particularly the shadow chancellor, bounces Ed Miliband, the kind of slightly dithery soft left type, into a pro-austerity a pro-austerity position, and the Labour Party basically say, and this is part of their kind of shtick really, we will do austerity, but we'll do it more sensibly. It's not the idea that austerity itself, which killed hundreds of thousands of people in the UK, the final numbers, vary, but the last count that took account for the period 2012 to 2019, I think it was a 70-year period, looks like it killed in that period alone 300,000 people, 300,000 excess deaths. So God only knows how many it is accounted for now. There are 14 million people in Britain in poverty and 4 million children living below the poverty line. So austerity has kind of de-developed the country. The possibility, if you've committed serious crime, of actually having your day in court is pretty slim these days because of huge backlogs in trial dates and courts, and the kind of the civil infrastructure of things like health and safety inspectors, the kinds of people that make sure that your local takeaway isn't going to give you food poisoning, youth clubs, parks, municipal places like swimming pools and libraries, all gone, never to return. Magistrates' courts, crown courts, shuttered. 20,000 fewer police. These are things that kind of rip apart the actual glue of a functioning society, and give the far right an open invitation to organise. So the Labour Party were happy with all of this until you get Corbyn. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, who stands in 2015, doesn't think he's going to win, arguably doesn't really want to, said that the left needed to have a voice in the 2015 leadership election after Ed Miliband steps down as leader and wins on an anti-austerity platform. I think kind of partly can't quite believe it. So he becomes the leader of the Labour Party, and then you have for 5 years a non-stop rolling coup within the Labour Party. They think they're going to win in 2017, and they think that when Theresa May calls a snap election in 2017, that Corbyn's going to lose and they're going to get rid of him. But he does exceedingly well and nearly wins the election. And this terrifies them. So then you get, and this has been very, very well documented in Paul Holden's book, The Fraud. You get a secret grouping within the Labour Party called Labour Together, led by Morgan McSweeney, who is the kind of puppet of Peter Mandelson, and probably wherever you are in the world, you'll have heard of him and his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. And Labour Together, funded by billionaire or millionaire donations, bring down Corbyn. I mean, there are mistakes Corbyn made, and perhaps he's always better suited to being a campaigner rather than a leader. But were it not for the kind of internal sabotage, which is very, very well documented now, this isn't kind of tinfoil hat stuff at all, then we might have seen a Labour victory in 2019. So then you get Starmer, and it's not just that the Labour right won, it's that the dreams of the political right have been broadly articulated through Keir Starmer. Here we have somebody who is with Israel on its policy of genocide in Gaza right to this very moment, has not wavered from that 1 second. Somebody that never saw an arms manufacturer they didn't like, somebody that has restricted the rights to protest in the UK in unprecedented, historically unprecedented ways. Perhaps the only parallel is the restriction of protest during things like the Defence of the Realm Act and things like that. But here, in British peacetime, so a figure firmly on the political right. What does all this have to do with Mamdani? Well, Mamdani was, I suspect, is perhaps first seen as an outlier. His victory in New York last year was seen as, a one-off. But he's shown that when he endorses candidates, they win, and he's shown that a popular left platform is possible. What Mamdani has done has been to focus on material issues, rents, childcare, transport, these basic bread and butter things that wreck people's lives when they're not there. But he hasn't abandoned the kind of social and cultural aspect of the popular left. Not once has he thrown trans people under the bus in order to achieve, any kind of political gains for his broader social agenda. He has not once wavered over his condemnation of Israel. He has abjectly refused to for example, share a parade where some of the chief culprits from Israel actually were. He's a very canny guy, and he has not been tripped up. And part of that is to do with the fact he's very principled. He is somebody clearly who sticks to his guns, whether you like him or not, and has stuck to his beliefs, and has done that while effectively organising and effectively administering. And here is the great fear. Corbyn in Britain was written off as ineffectual, too weak to lead, incompetent. And there is this kind of really idiotic kind of centrist phrase in Britain. The grown-ups. The grown-ups are back in charge. People like Keir Starmer and stuff like that. The extent to which Keir Starmer has shown himself completely incapable of any sort of leadership, of any kind of ability to actually run the country, and has instead engaged in simply huge concessions to tech companies and to private equity. His sort of theory of political change, his theory of economic change, is that you just create this thing called growth that fixes all the problems, and the way you do that is by selling all the country's assets. I paraphrase, but I make it sound more stupid than it actually is, but it's only slightly less stupid than what I've just said there. It is kind of almost as stupid as the things I've just articulated. And so the fear that the Democrats have of Mamdani is that he can show that a socialist administration in New York can get things done. There will be plenty of people in America that will never believe that. To them, socialism is kind of just some sort of evil. Okay, but there will also be plenty of people that will see progress with their own eyes, and seeing is believing. And I think the Democrat Party, particularly in New York and previously people like Cuomo and stuff like that, have their kind of obeisance to Wall Street, particularly, has led them to almost lose the capacity to address the basic everyday issues of working class people because they're not listening to them. They When you have people like Hillary Clinton, who doesn't even go and campaign in working class swing states, and I think this was also a failure of Kamala Harris. Why go talk to them when you talk to Wall Street? That's who you talk to. And when you have a kind of a party that has been co-opted and corrupted by extreme wealth in exactly the same way that the Republicans have, then there's basically nothing to vote for. And the same is true in Great Britain of the Labour Party. When people say of the Conservatives and the Labour Party in Britain, oh, well, they're all the same. This is a very popular refrain. Well, they kind of are, you know? They kind of are. If you put backbench Conservative and Labour MPs together, they broadly agree on a whole bunch of stuff. The Liberal Democrats, they all believe in roughly the same kind of economic model and the same social settlement as a result. Perhaps they have slightly different cultural tastes, but they agree with things and they kind of get along. And when you look at how comfortable, say, Obama and the Bushes are, these are not diametrically opposed people. They believe in broadly the same things. They might say them differently. They might speak to different constituencies, but they essentially are on the same page when it comes to economics and society and empire. And now you find someone like Mamdani who isn't. Now, there will be a war waged against him. Of this I'm fairly certain. And will the Democrat Party look at how the extreme centre in Britain deals with its left? Maybe they will. Perhaps they've already done that. But what I also think is that this always in these instances, I mean, I sound like a very pessimistic person, but I always believe that there is cause for hope. That the main fear is that, and this is, why America spent so many decades overthrowing governments from Guatemala to Chile to Vietnam to Iran, is that when you have a broadly democratic socialist who says, we could share wealth more equitably, things don't have to be like this, what if we gave that a go? Well, yeah, you have to get rid of them. And the fear is that this is something that will catch on. This is the fear is that once people experience it, just as once people experience things like public, affordable, free at the point of use healthcare, they like it. And the experience of that in Great Britain with the NHS is instructive. Even when the NHS is undermined and broken by private finance initiative and all these kind of little extractive market innovations that have reduced its capacity to function, people will defend it to the hilt. And the idea of privatizing it or making it a pay-only service is something that is still electoral cyanide here in Great Britain. Once people get a taste for it and it improves their lives, they'll defend it. They'll defend it to the hilt. So what I hope is that Mamdani in New York shows that what he does can work, and then New Yorkers will fight for it, and they will defend it, and they will make speaking out, they will make attempts to undermine it electorally unthinkable. Here's hoping, anyway. Well, I'll leave you there, and I've got some great books to dive into. As I said, I have been kind of taking a bit of a mental rest recently because I spent a whole year kind of building up the wider explaining history verse. But I really want to dive into looking at the modern Middle East, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and once again looking at LA in the 1960s. So we'll try and have a crack at that in the next few days. Anyway, hope you're well. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.